Hello fellow Clashers, I'm KairosTime and welcome to the October 2017 balance breakdown. In today's video we're going to talk about the balance changes. We're going to talk specifically about what they are, why I think Supercell made those changes. We're going to talk about some shifts in the meta, viability of old and possible new combinations, specifically like a meta prediction. Then we're also going to talk about the best cards to use. This is going to include win conditions, support cards, and defense cards. Hope you enjoy. Very first thing we're going to talk about are the nerfs. What and why? First off, the Electro Wizard. Why? Well, the Electro Wizard has been extremely overused for so long. He's so strong, and the only reason why he wasn't used very much when the Night Witch was out was because the Night Witch was so powerful that there wasn't any use for the Electro Wizard. The Electro Wizard, however, though, great card to be using, extremely versatile on both defense and offense. One of the highest usage rates and an extremely high win rate when compared to decks that do not have the Electro Wizard in there because of his extreme versatility. First thing that we're taking, or Supercell's taking a look at, is a decrease in damage per second by 4%. In addition to that, the first attack that he makes after he lands is going to be a 0.2 seconds longer before he actually makes that first attack. This is actually a really big nerf to the Electro Wizard. I still think he's going to be usable, but I don't think that he's going to be that guaranteed solid pick to put into every single deck, no matter which archetype and no matter which playstyle. And that's what he was. Every deck you could safely have the Electro Wizard in there, and he even as a legendary, an under-leveled legendary in the ladder, he was actually even a really great option. So I'm excited to see this change, and I'm excited to talk about what are some of the changes that will come about simply just from this one nerf. Next we have the lightning usage. Why? Well, I don't think that there's actually going to be a big decrease in lightning, but I do think it will decrease in some usage. I think the biggest problem is that it was really promoting a specific deck type, and that Hog P.E.K.K.A. Lightning is just seemed to be just a little too strong. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the biggest thing with this is the decrease in the radius is going from 3.5 tiles down to 3 tiles. Next to that, we have a 3% decrease in damage. I don't think that's going to be a huge determining factor in a lot of different cases, but it is going to be important. Now let's talk about the buffs, the majority of the cards. Starting off, Sparky. What? Sparky is getting some love here from Supercell, and we are super excited about that because I have placed Sparky in the F tier in basically every tier list that I've done ever since the very beginning. And people kept on saying, man, like, hey Kairos, Sparky's not actually that bad. And I'm like, I keep trying, Sparky sucks, and I don't want to hurt her feelings by calling her something that, you know, something else. But she is getting a buff by increasing the time, or decreasing the amount of time that it takes for that charge to build up. It's going from 5 seconds up to down to 4 seconds. This is actually pretty significant. The biggest reason why Sparky really struggled was because it just took so long to land off a hit, and this is definitely going to make Sparky at least a little bit more viable. I don't think it's going straight up to S tier. My best guess is it's going right up to B, where it's a good option to use in some specific decks. Now to counteract this, it did receive a 15% decrease in its damage. This isn't going to be a huge, it's still going to one-shot majority of troops, but it is going to decrease some of the damage it's going to help as far as like getting rid of tanks, and also it does interact with the tower a little bit differently, as well as other Sparkies. So I think that's absolutely fair. Decrease the charge time, decrease the charge time and decrease the amount of damage that does, totally fair, but I do think that Sparky is going to be at least a little bit viable. Next troop, the Tesla Tower. The Tesla Tower has been another card in my tier list. It's just been awful, and the crazy thing is, even when it's over leveled, it's still a really poor option. And now it's going to be receiving a 30% damage increase, and that is really huge. The reason why that's so huge is because it's so much more damage. It's going to be able to one-shot minions, it's going to one-shot stabby goblins, and those are some big interactions. It's also going to one-shot equal level lava pups. That's a really big, that's a big deal. I don't know if it's going to be a super solid counter to the Hog Rider, but my best guess is that it's going to be. Now, its hit speed is going to be increasing to 1 second to kind of offset that damage per hit just a little bit, but overall, very good buff to the Tesla Tower that I'm very excited to see. Next up, we have the Graveyard. Now, the Graveyard received was super strong and kind of an unfair card because of how much variation it had, and so it received a nerf, and that basically made Graveyard just not a good card for competitive gameplay. As such, they're going to be increasing the duration that the Graveyard lasts from 9 seconds up to 10 seconds. That should increase it by 2 skeletons, except it is going to take 0.5 seconds slower before that first skeleton spawns. And what that means is that it's going to have a 1 doot increase, 1 skeleton extra. Now that might not seem like a lot, but the fact that it is increasing that, the slower duration is going to allow other people to really be able to defend a little bit quicker and react before they have to focus on those skeletons, and that's good. But that extra duration second is also going to help counteract that. That extra doot is going to play a big, or at least a decent role in making it a little bit more balanced. But then another thing that Supercell did mention was that they're going to make its pattern a little bit less random. How that is going to happen, don't know that. I don't know that, but if it's going to be less random, that means it's going to be more predictable, and that to me is good. That's good for both offense, and it's also good for defense. But one of the biggest buffs to it is, I know that's a red arrow, but it should be a green arrow down, saying that its range, or its size is going to be decreasing from 5 tiles down to 4 tiles. This is really great because you're basically going to be able to have more concentrated skeletons and be able to place the skeletons more surrounding a tower without fear of it having to go onto the King's Tower. You still need to check for good placement there, but I think that's a really exciting buff for the Graveyard because I think it's going to make it viable. And one thing that the Graveyard counters is P.E.K.K.A decks, because P.E.K.K.A decks do such a great job of countering so many different decks, but they don't counter. P.E.K.K.As don't do anything against Graveyard, so I'm excited to see that change there. Cannon Cart is receiving some love, increase in health and shield health by 5%. I'm excited to see this. I think that this is kind of something that the Cannon Cart needed to be able to last a little bit longer and be able to really help get at that damage out there. I think the problem with the Cannon Cart is that he just wasn't able to last long enough to be able to deal the damage that he needs to do. So this is going to be an exciting buff there. I'm really excited about the Spear Goblins receiving a decrease in hit speed, going from 1.3 seconds down to 1.1 seconds. This is a massive boost in damage per second. And before, when I saw Spear Goblins just like coming down at the tower, like 3 of them alone, I was like, I'll just ignore that and save that to Elixir myself rather than having to zap it. But now that's going to be dealing a lot more damage. I'm excited because these are actually going to be a little bit of threat value. You have to deal with them, and I'm excited to see how they're going to influence the chance of increasing zap bait decks. Zap bait specifically with Spear Goblins, the Goblin Gang, and Bats. Should be interesting. We'll see what happens with that. Then next we do have the Valkyrie. The Valkyrie is receiving a 5% damage increase. I don't see this changing a whole lot or changing the meta very much. The one exception may be if we do see an increase in Graveyard, then we may see an increase in Valkyries, but I think that's going to depend on Graveyard usage. Now let's go ahead and talk about some shifts in the meta, my predictions on how these different changes are actually going to change things. First off, I see a decreased usage in the Electro Wizard, and I'm really excited about that because the Electro Wizard has just been so versatile and you could use him in literally any type of deck. He really sped up the pace of every match, and that actually ended up decreasing the ability for a lot of decks, or for a lot of players, to play the beatdown archetype. I don't think the Electro Wizard is alone in this. I think there are some other cards that influence that, but the Electro Wizard definitely is one of the main culprits. So I'm excited to see a nerf to him, even though I really love the Electro Wizard. I still think he's going to be usable, but his decrease in usage is going to influence the meta in a few different ways. first off, we're going to be seeing an increase in some of these cards that charge up over time. The Inferno Tower, the Sparky, and then also the Inferno Dragon. I think all three of these are going to see an increase of usage here. Probably most likely the Inferno Dragon as the preferred choice of defense. Next, we do have Swarm Troops, not limiting to just these two cards, but the Goblin Gang and the Minions. I think we're going to be seeing an increase in some Swarm Troops, possibly Bats, possibly regular Goblins, possibly Spear Goblins, other cards like that. I think that the Electro Wizard was kind of preventing a lot of people from playing cards like these, even though they were really great cards. I think that that's another story, we can talk about that later, but I do think that we'll see an increase in some of these. And then my favorite reason for the Electro Wizard's nerf is the increased usage of some cards that the Electro Wizard just totally power creeps. He's just better in most ways. So I think that we're going to see a little bit more versatility or diversity in other decks. Maybe some Musketeers, maybe some Night Witches to help deal with Inferno Towers or Inferno Dragons, possibly the Ice Wizard, who does a really great job at being a solid defense. I think that we're going to be able to see some more different defenses. So I'm really excited about that change in the meta. Up next, we do have the Lightning. Now, the Lightning also influences things a little bit. I think the fact that the Lightning got a buff or a nerf, I think that that is going to influence two main cards. First off is the Hog Rider. The Hog Lightning is a combination that is just very strong because of Inferno Towers, you know, and the Lightning is just able to get into there. Now, I think that Lightning, like I said, will still be usable. I don't think we're going to see a huge decrease in Hog Rider. I think we're just going to see a slight decrease in Hog Rider, but it will still be a very, very strong and solid option. Also, P.E.K.K.A. decks. P.E.K.K.A. is now this is interesting. The fact that there's a decrease usage in Lightning means I think that we're going to be seeing a little bit some more like Inferno Towers and possibly Inferno Dragons. And because of that increase in those two different troops, I think that the P.E.K.K.A. is going to struggle a little bit. Mega Knight, I don't think the Mega Knight's going to struggle too much because Mega Knight's a lot quicker at being able to get to that Inferno Tower and being able to deal with that. But I do think that we'll see a little bit of decrease in P.E.K.K.A. I think that maybe this might be a little bit wishful thinking. I think that may be why Supercell decided to nerf the Lightning, but that's kind of my own hypothesis, my own theory, and I guess we'll see. I'm excited to see this change. I would like to see a little bit less P.E.K.K.A. because of some things that I talked about in a previous video about the meta being a little bit too offensive. If you're curious about watching that, then you definitely can. Next up, I do think we're going to see an increase in Spear Goblins, Tesla Towers, and some Cannon Cards. I don't think Cannon Cards going to increase a ton, but I do think that Tesla is going to be a viable option, and I think that the Spear Goblins are going to be viable in a lot of different decks. I think you're going to have to choose between Spear Goblins, regular Goblins, or Goblin Gang, and that's going to be your best bet. Goblin Gang is probably going to be my pick in most cases because I think it's just extremely versatile, but we'll get to best support troop cards and best defenses later. I do think that we're going to see an increased usage in Graveyard. I think that we may also see a slight increased usage in Sparky Giant decks or Sparky Beatdown decks. I think that may be an option. I'm not 100% convinced, but I think that Sparky, at least at first, people are going to be messing around with it. Lastly, I think we're going to see a big increase in Fireball usage, especially as players shift away from Lightning and start trying to look for different alternatives. I think that there's definitely the option of Rocket, and I definitely think there's an option of Poison, but I think Fireball is going to win most people's hearts over. Now, as far as best win conditions, number one on my list is going to be the Mega Knight. I think that the Mega Knight is definitely going to be a super strong win condition. He's very great on defense, very great also on offense, and I think the fact that the Electro Wizard was not nerfed, or was nerfed, is not going to influence the Mega Knight too much. I think he's still going to be a solid option. Next, I do think the Hog Rider is still going to be a really solid win condition to be using. I don't see his usage decreasing too much, if at all. And then the Bandit. The Bandit is such a strong card, so great at punishing you if you don't have a counter to it, and even then applying pressure if you do have even a counter to it. Next up is the Graveyard. I think we're going to see the Graveyard be usable. I think that maybe some Splash Shard, maybe, we'll see. But I think the Graveyard's going to be an option to use. And lastly, I think Miner, specifically Miner Poison with the Mega Knight, is going to be such a strong deck combination. As far as best support cards, number one is Zap. I think Zap is just going to be so strong, even over the log. The fact that we're going to be having to deal with Spear Goblins, still Bats, I think Zap is going to be a really big thing as far as competitive tournaments and things. Now there still may be some like minions and things like that in the ladder and stuff, but Bats definitely play a huge role in tournaments. I also think we're going to see some Fireball, possibly some Rocket, depending on the deck that you're playing. Rocket has a big role in some Mortar decks as well as some Spellbait decks, so that should be interesting. Now, one thing I did want to briefly mention that I haven't talked about, there was a fix or a change with the Inferno Dragon and the Inferno Tower, and that is that their charge resets once shields are broken. So there are 3 cards that have shields. There's the Dark Prince, there's Guards, and then there's also the Cannon Cart. Those 3 cards will be a little bit stronger against Inferno Dragons and Inferno Towers and such. I think that the Dark Prince is actually in a pretty good position. I can imagine seeing some Dark Princes in Golem decks because the Dark Prince can just rush up really, really fast, and then that Inferno Tower is going to stop once his shield is broken and have to retarget onto it and start building up that pressure again. And I think that the Dark Prince may have a good option to use in some certain decks. I also think that the Spear Goblins are going to be a really great support card to use in a lot of different decks, possibly even like Hog Cycle decks where they can just apply some pressure, possibly even with a Goblin Barrel Miner combination or something like that, where the Spear Goblins have to tank. I think they'll be a good defensive card, especially if you can catch your opponent off guard without the zap. I think Spear Goblins and Bats and maybe even Skeleton Army, if you have those 3 cards or 2 of those 3 cards in your deck, then you're going to put your opponent in some tough situations and be able to defend against a lot of pushes. Also, I think that the Bats and the Minions and some other cards like that are also going to be very viable support cards as far as like Air Troops go. I think Mega Minion could also fall in line with that as well. As far as best defenses go, I honestly think that the best very well possibly defense and support card could be the Goblin Gang. The fact that the Goblin Gang is getting a buff due to those Spear Goblins really tells me that the Goblin Gang is just going to be a solid option. I really do think so. Definitely worth leveling up if you are going to be building a ladder deck that does not have the Goblin Gang in there, and also to consider when you're building a tournament deck. As far as other defensive troops, I think that the Electro Wizard is going to be about on par with the Ice Wizard. I think they're both going to be solid options. My hope is that the Electro Wizard will be a little bit more of an offensive card, or a little bit more defense, and kind of split between defense and offense, whereas the Ice Wizard is going to be more solid defense. I also do think that we're going to see an increased usage in these 3 defensive buildings slash Inferno Dragon. I think the Inferno Tower is going to be usable, especially to prevent things like P.E.K.K.A.s and Mega Knights. And then I also think the Inferno Dragon is a very solid option, and my hope is that the Tesla Tower also helps to balance the meta out just a little bit. And then lastly, I think that the Ice Golem is such a great card. Primarily used on defense. You can kind of use them on offense a little bit, but Ice Wizard in my last competitive tier list video had the highest win rate out of all of the cards in the game. And based off of the different nerfs and buffs to this meta, I don't think that the Ice Wizard is going to be or the Ice Golem is going to be any less useful than in the past. I think he's definitely going to be a great option to be using there. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you agree with what I had to say, please let me know. If you disagree, please let me know, especially why you think that I am wrong. But this is all based off of my knowledge, and I hope that you enjoy. For now, this is KairosTime ticking by, and we will see you in the arena.